The village of Amuaka lay cradled between dusty hills and sacred rivers, a place where whispers could shape destinies, and the wind carried more than dust. It carried stories, curses, and the eyes of ancestors. Time in Amuaka didn't pass with clocks but with drumbeats, harvests, and moon cycles. It was in this forgotten part of the world that Adana was born, a girl with the eyes of the forest and the smile of rain. Even at 6, there was something ethereal about her. The elders said she had inherited the spirit of her mother, Amaka, a woman known across 3 villages for her grace, her beauty, and the kindness she wove into every word. Amaka had died suddenly, quietly, with no sickness or scream, just a stillness that left the village uneasy. Some said it was the river spirits calling her back. Others whispered of poison, but nobody dared speak it aloud. Adana had no memory of her mother's voice, but every day she sat under the udala tree where Amaka once sang to the winds. She would trace her fingers in the dirt, drawing pictures of her mother based on village stories. Her father, Obina, was a quiet man weighed down by grief. He loved Adana, though his sorrow often hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. He worked hard to provide, but his fields yielded less with each season, and the once robust man began to stoop from burdens beyond the physical. Then came Kiru. She arrived like a monsoon, elegant, mysterious, and full of promises. Her skin gleamed like polished mahogany, and her laughter melted even the hardest hearts. The village women watched with wary eyes as Obina began to speak of her, their voices heavy with suspicion masked as politeness. Kiru was not from Amuaka. She came from the distant riverlands, where women were said to know herbs that could heal or harm. But Obina, starved for companionship, invited her into his compound. Within months, they were married. Adana, still hopeful and innocent, tried to embrace her new mama. She offered flowers, shared her tiny portions of food, and greeted Nkiru with a toothy grin each morning. But Nkiru only smiled with lips, never with eyes. In the shadows of their mud brick home, her gaze hardened. She would mutter under her breath when Adana passed, calling her spirit child and mirror of the dead. The resemblance between Adana and her mother gnawed at Nkiru's pride. It wasn't just that Adana reminded her of a woman she could never surpass, it was that the villagers still spoke of Amaka with reverence, comparing every move of Nkiru to a ghost. Nkiru's jealousy grew like weeds in a broken field. She began whispering into Obina's ears at night. "Your daughter talks to herself, have you not seen?" she'd say, voice soaked in concern. "She wakes up crying. The ancestors are angry, my husband. Perhaps the child is cursed. Perhaps it is her mother's spirit seeking vengeance." Obina, weakened by grief and desperation, began to believe. When the yam harvest failed that year, Nkiru clutched her chest and gasped, "It is the child. The land rejects her." Adana noticed the change. Her father no longer lifted her into the air or tucked her in at night. He began avoiding her eyes, walking past her as though she were a shadow. Nkiru took over the house, locking the food store, barking orders, and beating Adana over small mistakes. Adana bore it all quietly. She still believed her father loved her, that it would pass, that perhaps if she were good enough, things would return to how they were. But love in the heart of a man poisoned by lies is like water in a cracked pot, it seeps away slowly until only dust remains. One morning, Obina didn't rise. They found him on the mat, eyes wide open, mouth slightly parted as though he had been whispering secrets to the dark. Nkiru wailed louder than all the women combined, throwing herself to the ground, tearing her wrapper in exaggerated grief. The village mourned him, but Adana, too young to understand death fully, simply sat by his feet, trying to shake him awake. "Papa, we can go fetch water." "I will carry the small pot," she whispered. But he didn't move. And now, Nkiru was in charge. With Obina gone, Nkiru claimed all he had, the goats, the land, the house. No one challenged her. She played the grieving widow well, feeding the elders during the mourning and distributing kola nuts in her late husband's name. She wore white for moons, but behind the veil of tradition, her eyes calculated. Adana was no longer a child to her, she was a burden, a threat, a constant reminder that she would never fully replace Amaka. So Nkiru hatched a plan. She began telling Adana stories of the city. "You're special, my dear," she cooed with honeyed poison. "You must go to school in the city. There are buses and books and girls like you who become queens. You want to be a queen, don't you?" Adana, too young to grasp the traps in sweet words, nodded eagerly. Her heart fluttered at the thought of classrooms and chalkboards and shoes that clicked on tile floors. "We must dress you well," Kiru said, washing Adana's clothes for the first time in weeks. She even braided her hair that night. The next morning, Kiru walked with her down the dirt path, past the goats, past the market, to where a red-faced trader waited with a cart and a crooked grin. "This is Uncle Malu," Kiru said. "He will take you to the city." Adana clutched her tiny bag tightly. Something felt strange. The man didn't look like a teacher, and his cart didn't look like it carried books. But she remembered the promise, of school, of being a queen. "Be good, eh?" Kiru said, placing a hard kiss on her forehead, then stepping back. The trader took her hand and hoisted her into the cart like a sack of yams. As they rolled away, Adana looked back. Kiru was already walking in the opposite direction, her wrapper swinging like a snake's tail, her face calm. Adana did not know it yet, but she had just been sold. Not for money alone, but for jealousy, pride, and the unbearable weight of being a mirror to a dead woman who refused to be forgotten. The journey to the city was long and silent. The man who now held the reins of Adana's fate, Uncle Malu, spoke very little, only grunting when the cart hit potholes or when the horse slowed too much. Adana sat curled beside a sack of charcoal, the sharp edges biting into her back. She clutched her small bag tightly, the one Kiru had helped her pack, filled only with a torn wrapper, a comb, and an old wooden spoon her mother had once carved. Her heart beat with a mix of fear and hope. She didn't know what school looked like, but she imagined blackboards, chalk, and children laughing. So she waited, even as the landscape changed from wide bush paths to narrow alleys and dust-choked compounds. But there was no school. No teachers. No classrooms. Instead, there was a house surrounded by iron fences and locked gates. A tall, sharp-faced woman opened the gate and examined her like meat in the market. "She's small," the woman said. "But she'll do." Malu chuckled and handed Adana over with a few muttered words. Then, without even a goodbye, he left. The woman, Madame Eka, grabbed Adana's wrist and pulled her through the gate like luggage. Inside, the house smelled of bleach, sweat, and something sour. It was large but cold, filled with silence that hummed like a warning. Within minutes, Adana's wrapper was stripped off, and she was given an oversized dress. No crying. No noise. No food until your work is done, Madame Eka barked. "You are mine now. You'll clean, wash, cook, scrub, and learn fast. Or else." And so began Adana's life in chains. She became a shadow in Madame Eka's household. She rose before the sun and scrubbed until her fingers cracked. Her feet were bare and bruised, her tiny arms trembling from carrying heavy water buckets up concrete stairs. Every mistake earned her a slap. Every broken plate, a beating. No one asked her name, she was simply you. She was never allowed outside the compound walls. At night, she curled on a mat beside the kitchen, trying to remember her mother's face, but it had faded into a blur. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The world narrowed to tiled floors, boiling pots, and endless commands. But somewhere in the darkness of her suffering, Adana's spirit did not die. It shrank, it cried, it bled, but it did not break. One day, while cleaning the backyard, she met Kelechi. Kelechi was a year older, a boy with wiry limbs and eyes too old for his face. He worked in the neighbor's compound, and they shared a common wall. While dumping trash, he whispered, "Are you new?" She nodded. "I've been here 2 years," he said. "They don't let me out either." That small exchange turned into something more. Every few days, they'd steal a minute by the wall to talk. They swapped stories, whispered dreams, and shared survival tips. Kalechi taught her how to hide leftover food, how to feign ignorance to avoid punishment, and how to listen, really listen, for danger. But most of all, he reminded her she was not alone. "I want to escape," he once whispered through the hole in the wall. "There's a big road nearby. If you follow it, it leads to a market. From there, I don't know. But it has to be better. Escape." The word became fire in Adana's chest. She began watching, noticing the world outside the windows. She memorized the names of streets she overheard in conversations, counted the minutes the gate stayed open when deliveries came. When she was occasionally sent to fetch water from a tap across the street, always under the watch of an older maid, she looked at signs, listened to the wind, paid attention to the color of buildings. She carved the map in her mind, piece by piece. But even as her hope grew, so did the cruelty. Madame Aka's husband, a silent man with cold eyes, began watching her too closely. His presence filled Adana with a dread she couldn't explain. He never touched her, but the way his eyes lingered told her that the danger in the house wasn't just the beatings. She became more cautious, more invisible. She knew time was running out. Then, one afternoon, something shifted. She had been sent to carry a heavy basin of soaked clothes to the drying line outside. Her back ached, and her feet dragged. As she passed the gate, a woman on the street slowed her pace. The woman had sharp eyes and wore a faded wrapper with dignity. She paused and watched as Adana limped past, struggling under the weight. "Hey," the woman called gently. "Little one, are you okay?" Adana froze. No stranger had ever spoken to her since she arrived. Before she could answer, the older maid barked, "Go inside." No talking, and shoved Adana through the gate. But the woman had seen enough. The limp. The bruises. The fear. Her name was Ifeoma. She had grown up in a village not unlike Umuoka, and she had once escaped a house like this herself. The sight of Adana stirred a fire in her. She began passing by the compound more often. Sometimes she pretended to sell plantains, sometimes to sweep. She observed, waited, asked quiet questions of street boys and market sellers. Who lived in the house? Did they employ children? Had others come and gone? She pieced together the story in silence. Adana noticed her too. She saw the woman's eyes return again and again. She didn't know what it meant, only that the woman had seen her, really seen her. For the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar flicker in her chest, not fear, not grief, but something warm. But then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman stopped coming. Adana watched the street for days, hope thinning like smoke. She thought maybe it was a trick. Maybe it had meant nothing. Maybe she was still alone. Then, 3 weeks later, on a rainy evening when thunder roared like angry spirits, the gate bell rang. It was Ifeoma. And this time, she didn't come alone. The wind was heavy that night, full of secrets and warnings. Rain had drenched the streets earlier, and the puddles still shimmered under the dim moonlight. Inside Madame Aka's house, the air was unusually still. Most nights were filled with the echo of orders, the clatter of dishes, or the soft sobs of tired children. But tonight, everything felt like it was holding its breath. Adana lay on her mat in the dark kitchen corner, pretending to be asleep, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She clutched the small note Kalechi had slipped through the wall earlier that week. "Tonight, when the gate creaks twice, be ready. Trust her." She didn't know who her was, but something in her bones told her it was the woman with the sharp eyes and kind voice. The one who had disappeared for weeks only to reappear with a longer stare and a sharper purpose. She now knew her name, Mama Igioma, a market herbalist and healer whose hands healed wounds and whose words softened pain. That night, Mama Igioma wasn't alone. She brought her son, Obina, a boy in his late teens with eyes like night, alert and calm. He had grown up on the city streets and knew the rhythm of fear. He'd helped rescue children before. This time, it was Adana. At precisely 2 creaks of the rusted front gate, Adana rose, barefoot and silent. She had no bag, no possessions, only the whisper of her mother's memory in her ears. Obinna met her in the backyard where the trash bins stood like sentries. He gave her a nod, and she followed him over the side fence using a broken water drum as a boost. Her limbs trembled, not from cold but from years of buried fear now rising to the surface. Mama Igielma stood waiting in a back alley, dressed in dark cloth. She grabbed Adana's hand, strong and sure, and whispered, "Don't speak. Just run when I say." They darted through narrow alleys, past sleeping dogs and flickering bulbs. Once, a car turned the corner, and they pressed themselves into the shadows, holding their breath as the headlights swept past. At the edge of the neighborhood, a small van waited. Inside were blankets, hot tea, and silence. As the city lights faded behind them, Adana curled into Mama Igielma's side and cried, not loudly, but the kind of cry that carried all the years of pain she had buried deep. They reached the rehabilitation shelter just before dawn. The building wasn't fancy, but to Adana, it felt like a palace. It had a gate that locked from the inside. It had beds, real beds, with soft pillows and clean sheets. It had women who smiled without cruelty and offered her warm rice without expecting anything in return. There was a doctor who checked her bruises and a nurse who rubbed ointment on her back. But most of all, there was silence, gentle, healing silence. For the first few days, Adana didn't speak. She watched everything and everyone. She flinched at sudden sounds and hoarded food under her mattress. She didn't trust laughter. Didn't believe in comfort. At night, she sometimes woke up screaming, reliving Madame Aka's voice or the cold stare of the man in the shadows. But the workers were patient. They gave her space, spoke softly, and let her draw with crayons, even if all she drew were dark clouds and stick figures behind bars. A month passed before she finally spoke her name. "My name is Adana," she whispered to the house mother one morning. The woman, Auntie Chica, hugged her gently. "It's a beautiful name," she said. "It means father's daughter, yes?" Adana nodded slowly. "But my father is gone. My stepmother said I was cursed. She sold me." The words spilled out, each one like a stone lifted from her chest. She spoke of her village, Umuoka. Of her father's sudden death. Of Nkiru, her stepmother, who wore a red scarf and always smiled when guests were near but hissed like a snake when no one was looking. She described the traitor who took her. The house. The beatings. The other children. Kalechi. Each story brought tears from the staff, but they didn't cry in front of her. They wrote things down, recorded names, and passed on the information to someone new, a volunteer lawyer named Barrister Lady, who came to read stories to the children every weekend. Barrister Lady had a keen ear and a sharper instinct. She sat quietly in a corner, pretending to read a folk tale about a girl who became a bird. But as Adana described her village and the people in it, the lawyer's pen slowed. She had once worked a case involving missing children from rural villages. Something about Adana's tale, its rawness, its detail, the strange mention of a red scarf, triggered a memory. That evening, she didn't leave the shelter after the reading. She stayed back, requested Adana's full case file, and spent hours poring over records. Then she made a quiet call to a contact in the state ministry. The next day, Barrister Lady returned with a map, photos of the southeastern villages, and a plan to travel. But before that, she needed one thing. Adana's full story. And as she sat across from the girl who had survived so much and still clung to hope, she asked the question that would start it all, "Adana, can you help me find the woman who did this to you?" And Adana, eyes tired but unwavering, nodded. The harmattan winds returned each dry season, brushing red dust over the clay walls of Umuoka village and whispering secrets that had long slept beneath the surface. In the years since Adana's disappearance, much had changed on the outside, but within the hearts of those who remembered, questions still lingered. Nkiru had grown older, her face smooth but her eyes sharper. The villagers now called her Mama Wisdom and brought palm wine to her compound in exchange for prayers and charms. Her compound was one of the finest in the village, with 3 large rooms, corrugated roofing, and servants who spoke in hushed tones. No one dared to challenge her openly, for she had become the custodian of her late husband's farmlands, the one who knew how to talk to spirits and could command favor. But under the facade of incense and sermons, her past simmered like palm oil too long on fire. There were whispers. The old women who sat near the stream spoke with lowered voices. "Do you remember that girl? What was her name again?" "Adana?" "Yes, the bright one. Her mother died strangely, and then she just vanished. They say Nkiru sent her to school. But who sends a 6-year-old away without saying goodbye? She buried her husband quickly. Too quickly." The stories floated through the village, never landing, but never vanishing. Nkiru, despite her control, had begun to hear the murmurs in the rustling of the trees and in the spaces between greetings. Then, something shifted. It began when a stranger came to the village market. A woman in Ankara wrappers and glasses, not dressed like a missionary or a trader. She said she was writing a book on village histories, but her questions were sharp and careful. "Do you remember Chief Isa's daughter, Adana? Was there ever a land dispute after he died? Do you remember who came to take the child away?" This woman, barrister lady, moved gently, speaking with elders and market women, not asking directly about Nkiru but noting every hesitant pause, every uncomfortable shrug. She visited the old palm wine tapper who remembered how Adana's father once wept alone near his farm. She spoke to Mama Nkechi, who once helped deliver Adana as a baby. And she found a priest who admitted, with a troubled face, that the last time he saw the child was before Nkiru suddenly announced she had been sent to live in the city. One evening, Barrister Lady was taken to a small shrine outside the village, deep among the trees, where a seer lived, old man Uzoma, blind in one eye but respected for his visions. She didn't say much, only asked if the spirits whispered anything about a child lost. Uzoma's fingers trembled as he lifted his kola nut to his lips and cast it upon the ground. The pattern it formed turned his face pale. "A child wronged returns," he murmured. "The tree that stood in fire will bear fruit again. But the one who cut the roots with her hands will bleed when the harvest comes." Barrister Lady didn't fully understand the meaning, but she noted every word and returned to town. Meanwhile, in the heart of the village, Nkiru grew uneasy. Chickens she kept for sacrifice refused to lay eggs. Her dreams turned to ash, every night the same vision, a child standing in her courtyard with fire in her eyes and chains falling from her wrists. The spirits she once spoke to turned silent. Her charms no longer worked. Her hands, once steady, began to tremble. She visited the local dibia, who confirmed the worst. "Someone you wronged long ago is coming back, and they are no longer a child," he said. "What you buried is rising." Panicked, Nkiru began bribing villagers for information. "Did you see anyone new in town?" A woman asking questions. But it was too late. One morning, as she sat in her compound preparing for a ceremony, a courier arrived from the magistrate's office in Owerri. A formal letter was handed to her. She unrolled the scroll with shaking fingers. The words were official, stamped and cold. "You are hereby summoned to appear before the land tribunal in Owerri regarding contested inheritance of Chief Isa's estate." She blinked, her breath catching. Land dispute? What land dispute? She owned everything. There were no challengers. She had made sure of it. But the letter didn't lie. The hearing was in 2 weeks. And attendance was mandatory. Nkiru stared at the words for a long time, but even longer at the official seal at the bottom. It bore the symbol of the Ministry of Child Welfare and the faint watermark of something she thought had been buried long ago. She clutched the paper to her chest. She had no idea what was coming. But for the first time in many years, Nkiru felt something she hadn't felt since her husband's death. Dread. The sun had not even reached its peak when the vehicle rolled into Omoaka. It was dusty and plain, just another charity SUV like those that passed through towns for health campaigns or church outreaches. But today, the heart of the village shifted as the door opened and a girl stepped out, a girl with posture like a queen and eyes that held the weight of storms and secrets. Adana had returned. No one recognized her at first. She was tall now, with her mother's full lips and her father's proud chin. Her hair was braided in neat rows, her skin radiant despite the scars that still traced parts of her hands and ankles, ghosts from the chains of her past. But what struck the villagers most was the quiet fire in her eyes. There was no bitterness in her expression, only resolve. Barrister Lady stood by her side, firm and composed, flanked by members of the Child Welfare Agency. Word spread like a whirlwind across the village. By midday, every household knew the impossible had happened. Adana is back. The lost girl. The one they said went to school in the city? The one they said died? Children ran ahead, calling others. Elders came from their huts slowly, unsure whether this was a trick or some spiritual illusion. The silence grew heavy, even the birds seemed to hush. And then Kiru emerged. She wore her best wrapper and gold earrings, her face stretched in the stiff smile of a woman used to fooling others. When she saw Adana, her steps faltered. Her eyes widened for a flicker, then, like a chameleon, she changed expression. "Who is this girl?" Kiru asked, looking to the crowd. "Why do you all gather like goats without shepherds?" "She says she is Adana," someone whispered. "That's a lie," Kiru scoffed. "Adana was sent to the city to study years ago. She never returned. I mourned her. Who is this impostor?" But Adana stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, measured like someone used to speaking in front of crowds. "My name is Adana Ease, daughter of Ngozi and Chief Chuka Ease. I was 6 when my stepmother told my father I was cursed. I was 6 when my father died mysteriously. I was 6 when she sold me to a trader who beat me and made me a slave." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the children stopped fidgeting. "I carried water until my hands bled," Adana continued. "I was never sent to school. I was never taken to the city for education. I was sold like livestock, because this woman was jealous of my mother's memory, and afraid that I looked too much like her." Kira shouted then, her voice shrill. "Lies! This is the devil speaking through her. You all know how good I was to her. She ran away. This is nothing but a trick to shame me." But the crowd no longer moved in her favor. Eyes once filled with reverence now clouded with suspicion and regret. And then, like fate had waited for the perfect moment, an old man stepped from the crowd. He was thin, hunched with age, leaning on a stick. His name was Maulam Musa, a once traveling trader now dying from a persistent cough. He had been bedridden for weeks but had heard the commotion and told his son to help him to the square. Everyone turned as he cleared his throat. "I remember her," he said hoarsely. "I remember that day." Heads turned. She was small, scared. "I was in a worry when Kira came with her. Told me she had a niece needing school fees. Said she needed money. She asked me to help find her a job. I didn't know the truth then. But later, I heard. I saw where the girl ended up. It haunted me. I didn't speak. I was a coward." He broke into a fit of coughing. "I am dying," he said when he caught his breath. "Let me not carry this sin to my grave. She sold that child." The crowd was silent. Nkiru's face drained of color. She took a step back. "That man is sick, he's confused." But no one moved to defend her. Barrister Lady stepped forward. "We have recorded your confession, Baba Musa. Thank you. Your words may save others like her." Moments later, the village constable arrived with 2 officials. Nkiru resisted, she screamed, cursed, tried to push them away, but she was handcuffed and led through the crowd. Some looked away, ashamed they had believed her lies. Others followed, whispering prayers under their breath. As she was dragged past Adana, their eyes locked. "I should have ended you when I had the chance," Nkiru hissed. Adana didn't flinch. "You did try." "But I rose." Nkiru was taken away in a government van, her cries fading with distance. But the silence that followed didn't last long. A group of men, relatives of Nkiru and loyal villagers who had benefited from her wealth, began murmuring that the trial would fall apart. They have no written proof. She can still win in court. If that man dies before testifying, what then? Barrister Lady overheard the whispers and turned to Adana. We've struck a blow, she said softly. But it won't be enough. Not yet. Adana nodded. I'll give them more. Because what they didn't know was that she had kept something all these years, something the traitor had once given her by accident. A letter. A paper trail. And in the folds of that paper lay the next weapon. The village cemetery was quiet, a patch of sacred earth where the wind whispered through dry grass and memories refused to die. Adana stood before the unmarked grave, her fingers trembling as she traced the small mound of red earth. Time had not granted her mother a proper tombstone, only the shade of a twisted aroma tree whose roots curled like guardians around the resting place. She knelt and placed her forehead against the soil. I'm here, Mama, she whispered. I'm back. Behind her, the air shifted. An old woman leaned against a cane, her eyes sunken yet sharp, wrapped in layers of faded Ankara cloth. She had been watching from a distance since Adana entered the graveyard. You look just like her, the woman finally said. Adana turned. Did you know my mother? The old woman nodded. I was the midwife who helped deliver you. Ngozi was my friend, a woman full of fire and grace. They feared her beauty. Envied her spirit. Adana stood, heart pounding. Can you tell me what happened to her? Truly? The old woman's eyes darkened. She was poisoned. Adana staggered backward. What? She had no illness. No fever. She fell suddenly, coughing blood. I treated her with everything I had, but nothing worked. Then she whispered to me one night, her voice barely audible, it's Nkiru. She wants my place. A week later, she died. Adana felt the world tilt. Why didn't you say anything? Who would have believed an old woman over the wife of Chief Chuka? Nkiru married him before your mother's body was even cold. Your father was grieving, vulnerable. He married her quickly. Too quickly. The midwife looked away, shame pooling in her voice. We were cowards. Adana clenched her fists. And my father? The woman lowered her voice. They killed him too. It wasn't a sickness that took him. He began to suspect her, he was about to change his will in your favor. Then one day, he just dropped dead. The village said it was a heart attack. But I saw him hours before. He was fine. Adana felt the rage rise, a fire spreading through her limbs. It wasn't just abandonment. It was betrayal, calculated, layered, and treacherous. And now she had names. Motives. By the time she returned to the legal team, her mind was storming with fury. Barrister Lady paced the charity office, phone to her ear, her face tight. We have a problem, she said, the moment she saw Adana. The old traitor, Musa, is gone. His house is empty. His son swears he was taken in the night. No witnesses. Just gone. Adana stared in disbelief. They kidnapped him? Or worse. The case has gone viral, every news station is talking about it. Politicians are stepping in. Suddenly, things are going missing. Testimonies redacted. The court date keeps getting pushed back. It stinks of corruption. Mama Igielma entered the room next, her face grave. I've been followed, she said simply. 3 days now. I saw the same car twice near my stall. I think Nkiru's brother is trying to bury this from both ends. Barrister Lady sighed. That man is a land surveyor for half the region. If they inherited everything from your father after killing him, then this is not just a murder case. It's fraud. It's generational theft. Adana felt like the floor was disappearing beneath her. So what do we do? Find more proof, Mama Igielma said. We need something that speaks from the grave. For days, Adana fell into despair. Sleep became haunted. In her dreams, her mother stood at the edge of a dark forest, reaching out. "Don't stop, Adana. You are my voice now. You are the fire they feared." But every lead they chased seemed to fade. Until one afternoon, Mama Igielma came running into the office, a bundle clutched in her arms, her eyes wide with shock. "I found something," she said, panting. "You won't believe this." "What is it?" Adana asked. "Back when your mother died, she had told me she feared for her life. She said if anything happened to her, she would leave a sign beneath the aroma tree. But we searched and never found anything." She slowly unwrapped the bundle, revealing a dried calabash, cracked with age. "I never thought to look inside the roots," she said. "Today, something told me to go." Inside the calabash was a sealed envelope wrapped in oilcloth. The ink had faded but was still readable. It was addressed in delicate handwriting. "If I die unexpectedly, know it was not by my own fate. Nkiru is not who she claims to be." Adana opened it slowly, her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother's handwriting. The letter described Nkiru's early visits to their compound, her flirtation with Chuka even while Ngozi was alive, her strange behavior, and her growing paranoia. It mentioned a conversation overheard, Nkiru and her brother arguing over land deeds. At the bottom was one final line. "If this letter is found, protect my daughter. She is the last of my light." Tears streamed down Adana's face. She held the paper like it was her mother's hand. "We have her voice," she said. "Finally." Barrister Lady nodded. "We'll send this to forensics. We'll prepare a fresh case file. With this, they'll know your mother saw it coming. And they'll know we're not stopping." But as they celebrated their discovery, none of them noticed the figure in a parked car nearby, watching from behind tinted windows. Nkiru's brother lifted his phone slowly and made a call. "They found something," he said. "We need to move. Now." The morning of the trial, the sky above the village felt heavier than usual, as if the heavens themselves leaned in to witness what would unfold. People gathered in droves outside the makeshift courthouse, elders in traditional garb, curious children perched on windowsills, young men whispering theories, and old women murmuring prayers. It was no longer just a legal proceeding, it was a reckoning. Inside, the air crackled with tension. The courtroom was modest but packed beyond capacity. Villagers had traveled for hours, some barefoot, to hear what many believed would unearth secrets long buried beneath the soil they walked on. Adana sat beside Barrister Lady, her spine straight, her gaze unwavering. Her charcoal blouse hugged her frame, mature and graceful. She was no longer the girl who limped through town with a water pot on her head. She was a storm held in place by poise. At the defendant's table sat Nkiru, clad in an elaborate gheli and flowing wrapper that seemed to mock the solemnity of the moment. Her face, once so adept at crafting expressions of sorrow or righteousness, now flickered with poorly hidden fear. The judge entered, flanked by two court officers, and called the room to order. Barrister Lady opened the case with surgical precision, detailing the sequence of events: Adana's childhood, her sale into servitude, her eventual rescue, and the testimony of the traitor. Then, with a careful pause, she lifted the aged letter sealed in evidence plastic and approached the podium. "We now bring forth the voice of the dead," she said, her voice clear, solemn. "A letter written by Ngozi, wife of the late Chief Chuka, mother to the plaintiff, found buried beneath the aroma tree that shades her grave." The room was silent enough to hear hearts beating. "Lady, read aloud." The words trembled in the air like ancestral spirits awakened. The descriptions of Nkiru's deceit. The fears Ngozi had before her death. The overheard plans between Nkiru and her brother. The line that broke everyone's breath: "If I die unexpectedly, know it was not by my own fate. Nkiru is not who she claims to be." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. A woman sobbed in the back row. An elder who had once praised Nkiru shook his head in disbelief. Then came the prosecution's final blow. A forensic expert testified the letter was genuine, dating back to before Ngozi's death. The defense tried to object, but the judge overruled them. Under cross-examination, Nkiru remained calm at first. "I was a devoted wife," she claimed. "I love Ngozi's daughter like my own. These accusations are nothing but bitterness and lies." But when asked why Adana was found in servitude, with forged school enrollment papers that traced back to her name, her voice faltered. That was my brother," she said quickly. "He did it all. He forged everything. He tricked me." "Your brother is dead," the judge said coldly. "Are we to believe he orchestrated all this without your knowledge, and you benefited from it by accident?" Nkiru's voice cracked. Her palms shook. The perfect mask she'd worn for over a decade began to slide off her face like cheap makeup in the rain. She turned to Adana then, eyes wide. "You think I wanted you gone?" she hissed. "Every day you reminded me of her. That face, her face, smiling like you knew you were better. You had to go." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. The judge banged the gavel, but the damage was done. A confession. It didn't end there. Bank records showed transfers from Adana's father's estate into secret accounts under Nkiru's name. Property documents bore forged signatures. Medical reports from a trusted doctor revealed the poisoning of Ngozi with a rare herb only found in the region, a herb Nkiru's brother had access to as a former land surveyor and herbalist apprentice. In a single day, the truth unraveled like a Kent cloth yanked loose from a loom. The judge stood and delivered the verdict in a voice that thundered. "Nkiru, you are hereby found guilty of child trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, and land fraud. You are sentenced to life imprisonment, without parole." Cheers broke from the crowd. People stood, clapped, wept. Some shouted prayers of thanksgiving. It was the first time in living memory the village had witnessed justice served so fiercely, so clearly. Adana did not smile. She simply exhaled, as if releasing 10 years of grief in a single breath. The estate of Chief Chuka was restored to her. The lands Nkiru tried to steal were returned. Her name, once erased, was etched once more into the village registry. But even as Nkiru was dragged away in handcuffs, she twisted back one final time, eyes blazing with venom. Her mouth curled, and she spat on the ground near Adana's feet. "You think this is the end? May your wound dry, may your nights never be peaceful. I will haunt your name till my last breath, and beyond." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Barrister Lady rose and placed a protective arm around Adana's shoulders. "Empty curses from a broken woman," she said softly. But deep inside, Adana felt a cold chill she could not shake. For though the chains had been broken, and the truth uncovered, Nkiru's final words carried something ancient. Something that felt more than just anger. Something that felt like a seed planted in shadow. As dawn crept over the hills of the village, bathing the earth in a soft golden light, Adana stood at the threshold of her newly built school. The air was fragrant with the scent of freshly tilled soil and blooming hibiscus. This place was more than just bricks and mortar, it was a symbol, a beacon of hope for children who, like her, had once been forgotten or cast aside. The school's walls were painted in bright, cheerful colors, adorned with hand-painted murals depicting scenes from the village's history and legends. Above the entrance hung a carved wooden plaque bearing the name, Ngozi's Light. It was named in honor of her mother, whose memory had once been a shadow cast over Adana's life but now shone brightly in the hearts of everyone who walked through those doors. Adana smiled gently, remembering the long, hard road that had brought her here. The path was lined with pain and loss, betrayal and injustice. But it was also filled with resilience, love, and the fierce fire of a girl who refused to be broken. Today, she was not just the daughter who had been sold out of jealousy, she was the woman who had reclaimed her story and was building a future for her people. Beside her stood Mama Igielma, the wise market herbalist who had saved Adana from the dark chains of slavery and helped her find freedom again. Mama Igielma's eyes sparkled with pride as she spoke about the herbal clinic she now ran next to the school. The clinic offered healing to those who could not afford the town's doctors, herbal remedies passed down through generations, combined with modern care. It was a place where women and children could find refuge and hope, just like Adana once had. the villagers, many of whom had once whispered cruelly or turned their backs when Adana's name was mentioned, now greeted her with respect and admiration. Mothers brought their daughters to the school, eager for them to learn and grow under Adana's watchful eye. Elders nodded knowingly, acknowledging the justice that had been served and the healing that was finally taking root. One afternoon, Adana walked quietly through the village cemetery, clutching a delicate bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a folded letter in the other. The graves of her parents lay beneath a great oroma tree, its branches stretching wide as if to embrace the past and present. She knelt before the stones, tears filling her eyes as she whispered a prayer for forgiveness and peace. She carefully placed the flowers on her mother's grave and unfolded the letter, reading aloud the words she had written. "Mother, I forgive you for the pain we all endured. I forgive the silence, the loss, and the years of fear. I carry your strength in my heart, and I promise to honor your memory by living with courage and kindness. The curse that once threatened to destroy us is broken now, replaced by the light of justice and love. Rest in peace, knowing that your daughter has found her way." As she folded the letter and laid it beside the flowers, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead, as if the spirits themselves were whispering a benediction. News of Nkiru's fate spread quietly but surely through the village and beyond. In prison, the woman who had once wielded power with cunning and cruelty met a mysterious end. Some said madness had claimed her, the weight of guilt and shame fracturing her mind until she was no longer whole. Others whispered that it was Ngozi's spirit, finally at peace, that had brought an end to Nkiru's dark reign, a poetic justice born from the depths of a mother's love. In the evenings, when the village gathered around the fire, elders would tell the story of Adana's journey. One elder, his voice deep and steady, would recount it to the youngest children huddled close. She was sold for jealousy, but she returned with justice. A child cast out by darkness, yet she came back to light the path for us all. Remember her story, little ones, for it is a tale of hope, strength, and the power of truth. The children's eyes would widen, their imaginations alight with the courage and magic woven through their heritage. And in their hearts, the legacy of Ngozi's light would live on, carried forward by the generations yet to come. Adana often stood silently by the school's windows at dusk, watching children laugh and learn, their faces bright with possibility. She knew the scars of the past would never fully fade, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they were the foundation upon which she had built a future where no child would be sold or silenced out of jealousy or fear. In the end, her story was more than survival. It was a testament to the enduring spirit of a girl who dared to dream beyond the darkness, who turned pain into power, and who reclaimed not just her life, but the soul of her village. And with that, a new chapter began, one written in courage, justice, and love, forever etched in the heart of the land she called home.